Welcome to the RGLT Economics. In today's podcast, I want to discuss the necessity and prospects of the Sixth French Republic. Yesterday, I was walking in Paris and I saw many posters by supporters of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and it was about the Sixth Republic. And I have indeed been talking about the necessity of rejuvenating the French values, the values of the French Revolution, in the form of the Sixth Republic, in private. I wouldn't say this something like great minds think alike, because I wouldn't call my own as great, and I really doubt that Mélenchon could win the presidential election, which will just take place in a couple of weeks in France. But nevertheless, I think that this is really something that needs to happen. So in today's podcast, I want to basically divide this topic into four small sections. First, I want to talk about the problem that is facing the Fifth Republic. Right. Then I want to talk about two of the red herrings that a lot of the people who are, unsatisfied with the current situation, with the status quo, are likely to point to. And thirdly, I want to talk about the solution. What needs to be done for France to really come back to the values of liberty, of equality, and fraternity. That's been written everywhere. You see, every government building in France has these words, but these have become just like the callings of democracy and freedom in the United States have become just words without meaning. Lastly, I want to talk about the prognosis. What is going to happen? What I think perhaps will happen in the upcoming election. So the first point, the problems. I think, of course, there are lots of problems facing the French Republic. More directly, we see that there are high levels of debt and increasing levels of debt, high deficit, and we see of all sorts of problems, social tension, etc. But I think there are perhaps three main issues. They are: 1, bureaucracy; 2, corruption, institutionalized corruption; and 3, foreign influence. First, bureaucracy. France arguably is the country where bureaucracy was invented. And it was invented at a time when, right after the French Revolution, when situations were quite unstable. With bureaucracy, it was possible to create a system that is stable. Things no longer changed violently, and this bureaucracy created a relatively stable environment for the culture and for the economy to develop and evolve. And we see that France in the 19th century did very well and became one of the even wealthier than before. I think its presence, its standing on the international stage became greater in the 19th century. But with growing bureaucracy, France faces a problem in that it is too inefficient, and as times change, France is unable to change to catch up with the times. We see a lot of red tapes and so on. I'm not going to list them, and to be frank, I'm not really familiar with all the minute details. But all I can say is that France is the country in the world with the highest percentage of government expenditure in proportion to GDP. Over 50%, probably close to 60%. And that is extremely worrying. That means the unproductive part, in fact, a fraction, a portion, a part of the unproductive part of the economy is larger than half of the entire economy. I don't know if this is a very clear expression, right? Basically, what I'm saying is that the bureaucracy is not really a productive part of the economy, but of course, it's not the only part of the economy that is unproductive. So you can imagine that France really perhaps has a very small part of its total economic expenditure is by those part of the economy that is actually productive. How can a country that is so heavily burdened by bureaucracy compete on the world stage today? It hardly can. And the second problem is institutionalized corruption. Institutionalized corruption is a little bit different than just the individual corrupt figures. It is a system that involves, for the lack of a better word, a deep state. And this deep state determines how the country is run and how specifically each industry, each sector of the economy is run. And figures in this economy, in this deep state, get paid that perhaps is allowed lawfully so, but is just simply wrong. It's simply, for the lack of a better word, it's simply wrong. Let me give you an example. This is something that I didn't know before, but yeah, well, it is indeed so. If you see in France, all these people from the deep states, they graduated from a single school, mostly that school, but also some of them from a couple of other grande écoles, right? That school is I think called the École Nationale d'Administration, that school, but also some also come from the Sciences Po, the political science school, and I think for a smaller portion of them also from my old school. I'm not going to name it. And these people, right, when they get into, especially people from ENA, they go to the government at a very young age. They get a very prominent position at the ministerial level. And these people, after working for a couple of years, what they are able to do is to go to major French corporations in the CAC 40, a lot of them. They go to these French corporations, public companies, and they sit on the board. And they get paid quite handsomely. They work there for a few years, and then they come back to the French government. They get promoted to a higher level, and this is basically how an option, right? This is like a track of how the government is constituted. But this obviously, for those who have been paying attention, this is exactly institutionalized revolving door, right? One day you are at the ministry, economic ministry. The next day you are at a large corporation, and the next day you come back to the ministry, and you keep this relationship. In the meantime, you have made perhaps millions of euros, and you have this connection that you brought back to the ministries. And this ensures that France can never be competitive And this ensures in the long run that French industries will decay, that these companies who think that they are actually making some great decision, legally bribing government officials, they are actually killing themselves. French companies are losing ground worldwide because France ultimately is not this great big country that the French people would like to think. It is a small country. This is relatively small economy. Being inwardly corrupt means that outwardly it is uncompetitive. The third thing I want to mention, is this third problem is foreign influence. I think people who are listening to this podcast perhaps don't need me to really go too deep into it. These influences come from Brussels and Washington, for the most part, right? And I think a lot of the French people, unlike, say, those people from Belgium or from even Germany, I think French people are much more aware of this foreign influence. So I also don't want to go too much further in this. Now let's move on to the second part of today's podcast, 2 red herrings. First is immigrants. A lot of French people, they are unhappy with the situation that France has found itself in. And they like to say that this is because of immigrants, in particular, immigrants from North Africa. Right, they people of Islam or Arab origin, right? People who are ostensibly Muslims, even though not all of them are really practicing Muslims. Some of them, a lot of them are simply from that region and from that background, and they're not really practicing. But nevertheless, as long as they can point their fingers at someone as the scapegoat, they want to do it. This is wrong. France's problem, in my judgment, is not that of immigrants. And to the extent that France has problems with immigrants, it is because of its foreign policy led by its foreign influence, right? To the extent that France has immigration problems from Africa, it is because, in this part perhaps it's imperialism, not foreign influence, but it is because France has practiced imperialism, and more recently, after the 1950s, neo-imperialism in Africa, extracting resources from the region, bribing their political elites, and helping to maintain the corrupt institutions in Africa so that these countries cannot develop economically. They want to keep Africa underdeveloped so that they can extract resources, natural resources, from those regions. And to the extent that this continues, France will face problems with immigration from Africa, because a lot of people who are immigrants from Africa to here, it is because they don't have economic opportunities at home, and they want to find a better life. And since they are educated in French, a lot of them, and they believe, rightly or wrongly, that France that's this great country that believes in freedom, of equality, of fraternity, and they want to have better life. And how can you blame someone for wanting to have a better life? Right? I don't think that is the problem. A lot of conservatives want to say that this is a problem. I don't see this as a problem. In fact, one day when France falls so deep, so far, that no African immigrants want to come, that is when the French perhaps will want to get on a boat and go to Africa because they want to find a better life there, right? That is the dangerous part, and I think it's red herring. That's not why France has problem. And of course, to the extent that France has immigration problems from the Middle East, from the Arab, from Algeria, whatever, these countries, again, it's because, also Libya, right? It's because France, as part of NATO, has actively destabilized these regions. Right? When you destabilize these regions, when you, as part of NATO, bomb Syria, there will be refugees. And these refugees, they want to flee to a country of security. What can you do? Right. This is a problem. But to the extent that it is a problem, it is a secondary effect of foreign influence, of new imperialism. The second red herring I want to point out, I think it's actually less commonly so, but again, it's frequently talked about by the French elites. That is Russia and China, all these red herrings, right? Russian influence, China influence. This is simply, I think, it's a misdirection. Let me tell you a story, very quick one. The year that I graduated from my PhD, that year there was this guy, a French guy, who came to give a speech, keynote speech, at that ceremony, graduation ceremony of everyone from that year, not just PhDs, of course, masters, the Grande École, everyone. And this guy, I kind of know this guy because this guy used to be a CEO of a certain firm who really, let's just say, this guy went to China to beg for market, to beg for money, okay? This guy is not some guy that is so patriotic. But this guy, what did he say? At that point, he retired, right? He just retired, so that guy, he said, no, we must be so afraid, be concerned about the rise of people, countries who do not share our values. And I thought, fuck this motherfucker, right? This guy comes to China to beg for money. That's essentially what the fuck this guy did. And afterwards he said, no, we don't share our values. And what is this guy's value? These guys, new imperialism, that's their value. They want to rob Africa. They want to bomb Syria. They want to bomb Libya. That is what these guys have value. And this is coded language, right? And we see that in the last couple of weeks, this what used to be coded language about Russian influence, now they are coming out. They pure vile racism against the Russians. I think in the coming months, years, there will be vile racism against the Chinese in these. It's of course not in everyone, but this guy and the guys like this motherfucker, right? These guys, they have this hatred of certain people, and they believe that they are so much better. Of course, not. I think most of French people are not like this. I know many French people, most of them are not like this. But the elites, a lot of the elites in this corrupt Fifth Republic, they are. And this is, again, another red herring. These are not the problem, the reason why France is in trouble. It's not because there's Russian influence. It's not because there's Chinese competition. It's to the extent that there is any foreign influence, it's influence coming from Brussels, and Washington. The third part of today's podcast I want to talk about. By the way, I want to apologize for using offensive language. I think I had some chestnuts just now. Probably because I usually don't eat carbs. I had a lot of carbs, so I think I'm a little bit worked up. But I really have quite a bit of disdain for the guys like this. Right? They go to China to beg for business, and then they say they use coded language in the graduation ceremony of arguably the best business school in France, in front of over 1,000 people. I don't know how many people understood what he was saying, but this coded language basically it's telling the French people that beware of the Chinese, and right, that's basically what this guy was saying, and I was very pissed. Anyway, the third part, the solution to address the three issues. I see that there are basically three things that needs to be done, and this can only be done with the Sixth Republic, a new constitution in the French Republic. First, France needs to get rid of foreign influence. I think this is actually something that has a lot of popular support. France needs to leave the European Union. France needs to leave NATO. And also, of course, the Eurozone. Get rid of the EU and NATO. That is how France can get back its sovereignty. Get rid of foreign influence and can compete again. Secondly, France needs to be able to cut its bureaucracy, to cut red tapes, to make the entire process of its economy, the structure of its economy more streamlined, so that it can compete with people from Africa, from Latin America, from Asia, and also from Eastern Europe, because those countries, almost everywhere in the world, there is less regulation, fewer regulations, less regulatory burden, less red tape, higher efficiency, lower taxes. How can France compete with everything to the contrary? Right? If France, let's say France is sitting on a gold mine, it just basically mines gold, oil, gas, platinum, uranium, all the natural resources, then perhaps it's okay to have a high regulation, complex bureaucracy, high taxes. That may be possible. But because France is not enjoying that kind of advantage, it needs to be able to compete on a somewhat level field. France has made arguably better, not necessarily so, but arguably better education than at least some of the regions that it will have to compete with. France has arguably a more talented population, let's just say, right? Better work ethic. Oh no, actually I wouldn't say, I'm sorry. I don't think French people have very good work ethics. But it needs to find its competitive advantage. It needs to find its edge, and it needs to level the field somewhat. I'm not saying that France will ultimately be able to cut its taxes to such a level that it can compete with the, let's say, UAE, right? Because there is almost none. I'm not saying that France, no tax almost no tax in the UAE. I'm not saying France should cut its regulations to the extent that it can compete, cut its environmental and labor regulations so that it can compete with the likes of India and China, right? Because those countries have very few protections for labor and the environment. But France needs to find ways to cut this a bit, to level the playing field. And third, of course, get rid of the corrupt system. There cannot be these elite universities. I just find it really perverse that everyone from the government comes from these elite, 2-3 elite universities. They all go to the same school. They all have the same network. And then, of course, they all go to rotate into these big corporations. None of these can stay if France is to be competitive. If France wants to be relevant in the coming decades on the global stage, it needs to get rid of these institutionally corrupt systems. Right. There is one thing to have a couple of corrupt individuals that are, that are basically hiding their criminal deeds. There's another thing where this corruption can happen in the open and it's totally legal. For the former, all you have to do is to enforce the law. For the latter, you have to have a political revolution to get rid of the constitution, get rid of the entire system, to terminate the Fifth Republic. That's, I think, the only way. And finally, the prognosis. I think, obviously, I think this is not going to happen. The only person that is talking about this is Mélenchon, and I think he is not that popular. Perhaps actually to his benefit, because to the extent that he becomes popular, I think he will be smeared. Usually smears in France will be corruption or sex scandal, or in his case, Russian agent or Chinese agents. I think because he's left wing, he could very well be accused of being a Russian agent. So I don't think he is really going to be elected this year as president, and so there will not be a Sixth Republic. Another alternative that could potentially become the president is I think Marine Le Pen. I don't think she can, because she is one of the guys that politicians that like to point to the red herrings. The other one is this Eric Zemmour. This guy like to point to immigrants. Both of them like to point to Arab immigrants, African immigrants, and they want to say all the ills of France are this. And they, at some point, I think Le Pen used to say, NATO is not good. We need to reconsider NATO. We need to reconsider the European Union. But then, someone called her up, and she said she decided, okay, let's not talk about the EU or NATO. What does that tell you? Because that tells you that this is opportunism. She does not believe in solving any of the fundamental problems that's facing France. All she wants to do is point the fingers at the immigrants. She is essentially a racist. She wants to point fingers at the immigrants who are clearly one of the most vulnerable populations of demography of the population, and she does not want to point to any of the problems, right, with regards to bureaucracy. I think she does not want to cut bureaucracy. Probably, I think I vaguely remember she wants to give people money to some sort of that kind of thing. What is it called? UBI kind of thing. She does not want to deal with corruption. She has little conviction in terms of dealing with foreign influence. There's nothing she can do. When it comes to Macron, who I think will win, he's not proposing anything to solve these problems. He is a product of institutionalized corruption. Look at his history. He is the exact type of person that went from that certain school to the government, to the bank, back to the government. That's exactly, I mean, this is institutionalized corruption, and he's representing it. He is not doing nothing to deal with foreign influence. He said some things, made some comments regarding NATO, but he has absolutely no conviction. If he had conviction, if he had pushed the Ukrainian government to really come to a realistic assessment of the situation, there would not be armed conflict in Eastern Europe today. Right? He was one of the only leaders, in fact, the only leaders in the West that said something about it along that lines, but he did nothing. So he's not going to deal with foreign influence. And when it comes to bureaucracy, yes, Macron has talked about French bureaucracy. He wanted to reform. But these reforms are really just papering things over. When push comes to shove, what did he do? He printed money. That's the easy thing to do. And Macron is the guy that talks a good talk, but does nothing, because he lacks conviction. This, I think, is a problem that's plaguing the West. I recently watched a podcast, live show, in fact, by a podcaster on YouTube called Gonzalo Lira, and he discussed in depth, perhaps a little bit long-windedly so, about this, about why there is this problem of lack of leadership in the West. I want to just simply add one thing, which is that this is an institutional problem, right? This is institutional problem such that it is not because there is a single person in France, single French president who wants to destroy France, and so he implemented a set of policies. And there is not because there is a group of people in France who want to destroy France and implemented a series of policies. No, it is a system that's built up over the decades that selects people who do not ask questions and just conforms to the system. And I have a little bit understanding of institutional theory, and I think institutional theory is something that has a lot of interest in France, in particular. I think because French people have good grasp. A lot of people who are thinking have good grasps of the fact that France really is an institutionalized system. in the sense that there is no single person that controls the system. The system is set up that it perpetuates itself. There was a film, I don't know if I get the name right, I think it's either Brazil or is it the Children of Brazil or something like that. Basically, it depicts a system that is so institutionalized that everyone may think, a lot of people think that there is a higher person that is making all these dictatorial decisions. But in fact, there is no one. It's a system that perpetuates itself. And France currently has this system. It's the institution. And this system, for France to revitalize this system, needs to be destroyed. And this is, I guess, part of the so-called quote-unquote creative destruction. I hope that in the coming years, perhaps in the coming decades, France will experience a renaissance, going back to the values of the French Revolution. Right. I'm not saying that the French Revolution was perfect. It took a lot of tries, several tries, to build a better republic. And it still is not a great republic. But I hope that I hope that the next one will be better than the current. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you like this podcast, please give me a thumbs up. Like, subscribe, share, and just to keep in mind that this podcast is also available on Odyssey and Rumble. Thanks and have a great day.